The elevator doors opened on the 14th floor, and I already knew something was wrong. I had been in a budget meeting for 2 hours, and when my phone buzzed under the table, I ignored it the first time, the second time. By the third time, I flipped it over just enough to read the screen. It was a message from our office administrator. Donna, 4 words, come to HR, now. Not a question, not a please, just that. I excused myself, told my manager I had an urgent matter, and walked down the hallway with the kind of calm that comes not from confidence but from not yet knowing what you're walking into. The carpet was the same gray it had always been. The overhead lights hummed the same way they always did. Everything looked exactly the same, which made the stillness feel even stranger. I had worked at Halcyon Financial Solutions for 11 years. I started as a junior accounts analyst at 24, and I had earned every promotion through work that spoke for itself. I was not the loudest person in any room, but I was the most prepared. My files were organized. My reports were submitted early. My error rate over 11 years was something my department head had actually mentioned during my last review as, quote, statistically remarkable. I say this not to boast, but because what happened next was so far from anything I had ever done that I need you to understand the distance between who I am and what I was about to be accused of. I knocked on the HR director's door. It was a corner office, glass panels on 2 sides, vertical blinds half drawn. I could see shapes inside before I even opened the door, and when I pushed it open, my brain took a second to process what my eyes were seeing. My brother was sitting in one of the chairs across from the desk. My sister-in-law was next to him, and between them, on the desk, was a manila folder, thick with papers. I stopped in the doorway. Our HR director, a woman named Patricia, gestured toward the empty chair without making eye contact. I did not sit. I said quietly, "What is going on?" My brother looked up at me and something crossed his face that I still think about. It was not guilt. It was not hesitation. It was the look of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times and was now simply executing the plan. He said, "We need to talk about what you've been doing with the estate money." I looked at him. Then I looked at Patricia. Then back at him. He opened the folder and slid several pages across the desk toward Patricia. She looked at them. Then she looked at me. She said, "We've received some very serious documentation this morning. I think you need to hear what's being alleged before we go any further." I said, "What documentation? What are you talking about?" My brother leaned forward. He said, "Grandma Ruth left everything to both of us equally. The house, the accounts, everything. But you've been moving money. We have the bank records. We have the transfer confirmations. You've been draining the estate account for 8 months and redirecting the funds through a shell account that traces back to you." I stared at him for a long moment. I said, "That is not true." He said, "We have proof." I said, "What proof? Show me." He pushed the folder closer to Patricia rather than to me. She opened it and began laying pages on the desk. I walked around to look at them. There were printed bank statements. There were what appeared to be wire transfer records. There were 2 pages that looked like account authorization forms with my signature at the bottom. I picked up one of the authorization forms and looked at it carefully. My name was spelled correctly. The date was plausible. The format looked real, but the signature was not mine. I had signed my name roughly 40,000 times over the course of my adult life. I know what my signature looks like. The loops, the angle, the way the letters connect. What was on that page was close, but it was not mine, and I knew it the way you know your own face in a mirror. I set the paper down. I said, "Patricia, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I have never seen these documents before. That signature is not mine. I don't know where these came from or how they were created, but they are forged." My brother said, "Of course she's going to say that." His wife nodded. She said, "We expected this reaction." Patricia looked uncomfortable. She folded her hands on the desk and said, "I want to be fair to everyone here. These documents were submitted along with a formal complaint to our legal and compliance department this morning. Given the nature of the allegations, we are required to investigate. In the meantime, I've been asked to place you on administrative leave pending the outcome." I said, "On whose authority?" She said, "The compliance team and our general counsel reviewed the initial documents this morning before you arrived. This was not a decision I made alone." I looked at my brother. I said, "You called our company's legal department?" He said, "We called them yesterday. We wanted to make sure the right people saw what you've been doing." I felt something shift inside me, not panic, something colder than panic, a kind of precise, focused stillness. I said, "I want to ask a few questions before anything else happens." Patricia said I could ask them. I said, "First, these bank statements. What account number are they associated with? Because the estate account is managed through Meridian Trust, and I am one of 2 authorized signatories, every transaction requires dual authorization. My brother is the other signatory. So either both of us approved every transfer shown on these statements, or the authorization structure was bypassed somehow. Which is it? My brother said, "You had access." I said, "I'm asking Patricia." Patricia looked at the statements more carefully. I said, "Second question. These authorization forms have my signature. If you suspect forgery, the appropriate step is a handwriting analysis conducted by a certified forensic examiner. Has that been requested?" She said, "Not yet." I said, "Third question. When exactly were these documents created? Because I want the metadata." Every digital document has a creation timestamp embedded in the file. These printed pages came from somewhere, and I want to know when the original files were made, on what device, and from what account. My brother said, "This is ridiculous. She's trying to." I said, "I am trying to establish facts," which is exactly what a proper investigation should do before placing an 11-year employee on administrative leave based on documents submitted by a family member with a direct financial interest in the outcome of our grandmother's estate. The room went quiet. Patricia looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at my brother, then back at me. She said, "That's a fair point." His wife leaned forward. She said, "Patricia, we have photographs too. We have screenshots of conversations where she admitted to moving money around." I said, "Screenshots of what? Admitted to whom?" She pulled out her phone and started scrolling. She turned it to show Patricia a text conversation. I leaned in to read it. The name at the top of the thread said my name, but the messages attributed to me were not anything I had ever written. The syntax was off, the phrasing was wrong. And more importantly, the number the messages were supposedly sent from had a different area code than my actual cell number, which anyone with access to my contact information in this building could verify in about 30 seconds. I said, "What phone number is that message coming from?" She looked at the screen. I said, "Read me the last 4 digits of that number." She said, 7742. I took out my own phone and held it up so Patricia could see the number displayed across the top of the screen. I said, "My number ends in 3819. It has ended in 3819 for 9 years. The screenshots your husband just showed you were sent from a number that is not mine." Patricia took the phone from my sister-in-law and looked at both numbers. She was quiet for a moment. My brother started to say something. I held up one hand. I said, "I'm not done." I looked at him directly. I said, "Here is what I know. Grandma Ruth passed away 14 months ago. Her estate is valued at approximately $430,000. Under her will, that estate is to be divided equally between the 2 of us. The estate has been in probate, and the final distribution has not yet occurred. In the meantime, both of us have fiduciary responsibility over the estate assets." I said, "I also know that 3 months ago, you called me and asked me to sign a document that would transfer sole management of the estate account to you. You told me it was a formality related to the probate process. I told you I wanted to have my attorney review it first. You got angry. You said I was being paranoid. I said I was being careful. You didn't speak to me for 6 weeks after that." My sister-in-law looked at her phone. My brother looked at the wall. I said, "And I also know that about 2 months ago, our grandmother's estate attorney sent me a letter flagging unusual activity on the estate account. I have that letter. I have the follow-up correspondence. I have reported that activity to both the probate court and to a forensic accounting firm. That investigation is ongoing." Patricia slowly set down the folder. I said, "I would like to call my attorney now, and I would suggest that before your legal department takes any further action, they speak with the probate court directly." My brother stood up. He said, "This is exactly what she does. She twists everything. She makes you feel like you're the one who's wrong." I said, "I'm not making anyone feel anything. I'm presenting documentation, which is more than can be said for what you brought in here today." His wife grabbed his arm. She whispered something to him. His jaw tightened. Patricia picked up her desk phone and said she needed to make a call. She asked us all to wait. We sat in silence. My brother did not look at me. His wife studied the floor. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and thought about Grandma Ruth, who had spent her whole life saving so carefully, putting money away in increments that probably felt small at the time, building something that was supposed to outlast her. She had told me once, when I was a teenager, that money doesn't make people evil. She said it just shows you what was already there. Patricia came back into the room about 10 minutes later. She had someone with her. A man I recognized as one of the company's in-house attorneys. He sat down and opened a laptop. He asked my brother to confirm his name. My brother did. He asked for his phone number and address. My brother gave them. He typed for a moment. Then he said, "I need to ask you something before we go any further with this complaint." My brother said, "Fine." The attorney looked up from his screen and said, "Are you currently subject to any civil or criminal legal proceedings?" My brother said, "What does that have to do with this?" The attorney said, "Please answer the question." My brother said, "No." The attorney turned the laptop so Patricia could see the screen. She read it. Her expression did not change, but something behind her eyes did. The attorney said, "Our legal team ran a standard background check when your complaint was submitted this morning. It's routine in matters involving financial allegations. What that check returned was a pending civil fraud action filed against you in the county court approximately 6 weeks ago. The plaintiff is the Meridian Trust Banking Group. The nature of the action involves alleged unauthorized manipulation of a joint estate account." The room was very still. My brother said, That's a separate matter." The attorney said, "It involves the same estate account referenced in the documents you submitted to us today." His wife stood up. She said, "We should go." My brother said, "We came here in good faith." The attorney said, "I'd encourage both of you to speak with your counsel before saying anything further. What I can tell you is that this complaint is now suspended pending our own independent review, and that review will include forensic examination of every document you submitted today." My brother looked at me for the first time since I had sat down. I looked back at him. I did not feel what I thought I would feel. I had grown up with him. I had shared a bedroom with him until I was 12. I had sat next to him at our grandmother's funeral and held it together for both of us because he was falling apart and someone had to. I had thought, for a long time, that we were different, but not broken. That the distance between us was geography and temperament, not something deeper. I understood now that I had been wrong about that. I said quietly, "You should go." He didn't move for a moment. Then he picked up the folder from the desk. He put on his jacket. His wife walked to the door first. He followed her, and he did not say anything else, and the door closed behind him. The next 3 weeks were not easy, but they were methodical, which is the only way I know how to move through difficult things. My attorney filed an emergency motion with the probate court to freeze all estate account activity pending the fraud investigation. The forensic accounting firm I had already engaged submitted their preliminary findings to the court, which documented a pattern of attempted unauthorized access to the estate account, beginning approximately 9 months earlier. The access attempts had been unsuccessful because the dual authorization structure had held, but the attempts themselves were logged and traceable. The handwriting analysis on the authorization forms came back in just over 2 weeks. The conclusion was definitive. The signatures were not mine. The ink composition and pen pressure patterns were consistent with a single individual attempting to replicate a signature they had studied, likely from legitimate documents. The metadata on the digital files showed they had been created on a laptop registered to a home address I recognized as my brother's. The files had been created 6 weeks before the day he walked into my company's HR office. Patricia called me personally to apologize. She said the company had retained outside counsel to review how the complaint had been handled internally. She said that allowing a third party to present financial allegations against an employee without first verifying the complainant's identity and relationship to the alleged financial matters was a process failure, and that steps were being taken to correct it. I appreciated the call. I accepted the apology. I also had my attorney send the company's legal department a formal letter, which I won't describe in detail, but which made clear what my expectations were regarding the company's responsibility to the situation. I was not put on administrative leave. I returned to my desk the following morning. My manager sent me an email that evening saying only, "Glad this got sorted. You were missed in the budget meeting." The civil fraud case against my brother moved through the court system over the following months. Meridian Trust's internal investigators had flagged the suspicious activity before I even knew what was happening, and their documentation was thorough. The estate account had been subjected to a series of access attempts, and on 2 occasions, small amounts had been transferred out before the dual authorization flag had automatically reversed the transactions. Those transfers, small as they were enough to establish the pattern. My brother's attorney entered a negotiated settlement on his behalf. As part of that settlement, his claim to the estate was restructured. I will not go into the specific terms because my own attorney advised me not to, but I will say that Grandma Ruth's wishes, the real ones, the ones she had written down carefully and had notarized and filed with the court, were honored. the house was sold. The accounts were distributed. It took 7 more months after the settlement, but it was done, and it was right, and that mattered to me more than the amount. I have thought, in the time since all of this happened, about what I would say if someone asked me what the hardest part was. It was not the meeting in Patricia's office. It was not the 3 weeks of legal proceedings. It was not even sitting across from my brother while he tried to dismantle my professional reputation with forged papers and a manufactured text thread. The hardest part was the phone call I made to my mother 2 days after the HR meeting when I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "I wondered when something like this would happen." She did not mean it the way it sounded. She meant that she had watched my brother struggle for years with money, with the feeling that he deserved more than he had, with the way he measured his life against everyone else's. She had watched it and hoped it would resolve itself, and had not said anything to anyone because she did not know what to say. I told her she did not need to apologize for him. She said she wasn't apologizing for him. She was apologizing for staying quiet when she should have said something. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. There are things that get treated like family business, kept inside, managed quietly, because the alternative feels like destruction. You protect people who hurt you because they are yours, because the history is long and the future is unclear, and the idea of it all coming apart is more frightening than the behavior itself. I understand why people do it. I did it myself, for years, in smaller ways. I absorbed what he said at holiday dinners about my choices, my career, the way I lived my life. And I let it go, because letting it go felt like peace. What I know now is that it wasn't peace. It was postponement. The boundary I should have set, clearly and firmly, the day he called me and asked me to sign over estate management rights, was the boundary that would have made the rest of this unnecessary. Not because setting limits fixes people. It doesn't. He would still be who he is, struggling with whatever he was struggling with. But it would have told both of us, explicitly, what the line was and what would happen if it was crossed. Instead, I soft-pedaled it. I said I needed my attorney to review it, which was true and also cautious, and also, in retrospect, too gentle for the situation. What I should have said was, "No, this is not something I'm willing to do. And if you try to pressure me about it again, I'm going to involve the estate attorney directly." That's the conversation I didn't have. That's the conversation I've practiced having since then, in other situations, with other people, and each time it gets a little less frightening. My grandmother used to say that trust was not something you extended once and then waited to see what happened. She said you watched how people moved in the world. You watched what they did when no one was looking. You watched what they did when something was at stake. She had grown up during a time when there was very little margin for error, and she had developed, over the course of her long life, a precision about people that I used to find old-fashioned. I don't find it old-fashioned anymore. She would have known what my brother was capable of long before I did. She probably did know. In some way, she never said out loud, which might be part of why she structured her estate the way she did, with the dual authorization, with the attorneys, with the documentation. She built safeguards into the system because she understood that love and honesty are not always the same thing in the same person. I keep her photograph on my desk at work. It has been there for 11 years, moved from one office to the next as I changed positions. She is standing in her backyard, squinting a little into the sun, smiling the way she smiled when she thought something was quietly funny. I look at it sometimes when I'm in the middle of something difficult and I think about what she would say. I think she would tell me that what happened was not a story about betrayal, though betrayal was part of it. She would say it was a story about paperwork, about documentation, about the fact that the truth, when you have kept it carefully, can hold up in a room full of people who are trying very hard to reshape it. She kept receipts, literally. She kept receipts for everything, organized in shoeboxes by year, and she used to say that a receipt is just a record that something was real. That's what my years at this job had been. A record that I had shown up and done what I said I would do. And when someone walked into that office with forged documents and a manufactured story, the record held. People sometimes ask me whether I have any contact with my brother now. I don't. That is not something I say with grief, though for a long time I expected to feel grief about it. What I feel, mostly, is a kind of settled quiet, like a room after you've taken out the furniture that was always slightly wrong for the space. You notice the light differently. You notice how much room there actually is. I reached out to his wife once, several months after everything was resolved. I did not do it to relitigate anything. I did it because she had 2 small children who were my nephew and my niece, and I wanted them to know at some point, when they were old enough, that I was there. That I was not the person their father had described in that conference room. She did not respond. I did not follow up. That door is open if it ever needs to be, and if it never does, that is also a kind of answer. What I have focused on instead is work I can control. The estate is settled. My finances are stable. I was promoted again 8 months after the HR meeting, which felt, if I'm being honest, like a very specific kind of satisfaction. Not because I needed validation, but because 11 years of showing up with precision and care had created a record that one afternoon of forged documents could not undo. I think about the people who don't have that record, the people who are newer to their jobs, or who work in places where there is less documentation, or who are caught in situations where they are genuinely alone without anyone willing to push back in the room. I think about how different that afternoon would have looked if I hadn't known the estate file well enough to push back on every point, if I hadn't already engaged a forensic accountant, if I hadn't been calm enough to ask specific questions instead of shutting down. I don't say this to imply that I handled it perfectly. I made mistakes too. I stayed quiet too long. I was too generous about what I was willing to tolerate in the name of keeping the peace. Those are things I'm still learning to do differently. But in that room, when it counted, I had the receipts, and the receipts held. That's the part of this I want anyone listening to remember. Not the drama of it, not the moment when the attorney turned the laptop around and my brother's face went still. Those things happened, and they were real, and they had consequences. But the thing that made them possible was years of careful documentation, of knowing exactly what the facts were, of not letting someone else's story about me become the only story in the room. You are the first and most important keeper of your own record. Don't assume that truth will surface on its own. Put it in writing. Keep the dates. Save the emails. Know the numbers. Know who signed what and when and why. Because the people who want to rewrite your story are counting on you not doing exactly that. I learned that from my grandmother. She kept everything in shoeboxes. I keep mine in a cloud folder, sorted by year, backed up in 2 places. She would have found that funny, probably. That quiet, squinting into the sun kind of funny. I think she would have approved.